There was a moment, just before sleep, when a city would quietly fold itself away for the night. On this night, Sheffield did exactly what it always did, and that's what almost changed everything. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing demanded attention. It was simply another evening settling into darkness. You could hear doors closing along the terraces, one by one, the gentle finality of the day. Kettles were switched off, the last cups of tea cradled in tired hands. Somewhere, a wireless murmured before fading into silence. Streetlights hummed as they warmed, curtains were drawn, and bedrooms filled with that familiar, comforting quiet. No one sensed danger. No one stood at the window watching for signs. People went to bed believing tomorrow would arrive just as it always had. Yet, without knowing it, thousands were closer to disaster than at any other moment in living memory, all while the city slept peacefully on. Most people remember the 1960s as hopeful, forward-looking, full of promise. But this night tells a different story. It reminds us how ordinary life can feel right up to the edge of something extraordinary, how routine can quietly disguise risk. Here on Past Britannia, we remember the moments history nearly forgot. And if these stories stir something in you, do subscribe and give the video a like. It helps keep these memories alive, because what threatened Sheffield that night wasn't loud or dramatic. It was hidden, patient, and already in place, waiting quietly beneath the surface of night. In the early 1960s, Britain was still settling into the rhythms left behind by the war. People moved carefully through their days, shaped by routines that had been forged in hardship and frugality. Houses were modest but solid, streets familiar and well-trodden, and life operated at a pace that allowed time to notice small details. The scent of coal smoke in the evening, the warmth of a freshly scrubbed kitchen floor. Cities like Sheffield were built for endurance rather than speed, sturdy and practical, designed to weather both time and toil. Sheffield itself had a rhythm all its own. Factory whistles marked the change of shifts, trams rattled along their rails, and the clocks in workshops and offices dictated the day. Nights were filled with quiet sounds, the distant clatter of late workers heading home, the occasional dog barking, a coal delivery rattling over cobbled streets. People carried a quiet pride in their work, and in the city itself, a sense that they could rely on both themselves and the systems around them to see life through, day after day. Much of that trust rested in things people rarely thought about. Reservoirs brimmed beyond view, embankments held back rivers with steadfast patience, and countless unseen systems quietly kept the city safe. Out of sight meant out of mind, and for most, it had always been enough. There was comfort in that invisible order, a confidence that life would unfold without sudden disruption. But that evening, something in the air felt just a little different. The rain fell in patterns that seemed unusual, heavier in some places, lighter in others. The wind shifted with a subtle persistence, almost like a warning whispered along the rooftops. There was nothing dramatic, nothing anyone could have pointed to with certainty, yet a sense that something wasn't quite right had begun to settle over the city. And beneath all of this, one overlooked detail, unnoticed by the people going about their ordinary lives, quietly set the night on a course that would bring Sheffield closer to the edge than anyone could have imagined. The rain had a voice that night, tapping insistently against windows, sliding along rooftops in soft, urgent whispers. The wind moved through the narrow alleys with a restless energy, rattling drain pipes and teasing the loose edges of roof tiles. Somewhere in the distance, a tram clattered past, its wheels glinting wet in the streetlights. The city seemed alive in these small ways, though to the people inside their homes it all felt familiar, even comforting. Parents checked on children, ensuring covers were tucked snugly and the nightlights still glowed faintly by the beds. Night workers trudged home through puddles and wind, hats pulled low, collars turned up, their footsteps echoing along near-empty streets. There was no panic, no sense that anything unusual was happening, only the rhythms of life continuing quietly, as it always had. Cups of tea were finished, kettles switched off, radios murmuring their final news bulletins before fading to static. Yet beneath this ordinary exterior, the city was under strain. Bridges carried extra weight, embankments held water higher than usual, and drains groaned in ways people either ignored or misheard as nothing more than the storm's natural chatter. Back then, you didn't question these things. Structures were trusted, systems were trusted, and the assumption was always that they would hold. People assumed order, and order usually delivered. Contrast that with today, when a sudden change in weather triggers alerts on phones, a cascade of warnings across television and social media. In 1962, no one received a message, no alarms sounded. Trust in infrastructure and authority was absolute. The city was its own quiet guardian, and residents relied on it without thinking twice. And yet, even in that calm, a tension threaded through the night. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, the way wind could suddenly pause, or a door would bang in a gust and then fall silent. The city slept on, unaware, while forces unseen were slowly building beneath its familiar streets, reservoirs, and rooftops. By the small hours, a handful of people would sense something was amiss. A strange noise, a shifted shadow, a sudden shiver in the air. Nothing they could name, nothing that demanded action, yet enough to prick the edge of awareness. Sheffield was about to be reminded that the ordinary could hide extraordinary danger, and that the night held secrets the waking city would never guess. By the early hours, the danger had reached its quiet peak. It was never dramatic, never cinematic, no explosions, no roaring collapse. Instead, it was a matter of timing, inches, and chance. The water in the reservoirs pressed against their walls. The embankments leaned just slightly under the extra weight. And if one small shift had come a few moments sooner, the consequences could have been far-reaching. The city remained intact, yet only just, balanced on a razor's edge that most people never even imagined existed. Those who were awake experienced subtle clues rather than outright alarm. A neighbor's door banging in the wind, a faint trickle of water where it shouldn't have been. The sudden silence of a normally bustling street. These small disturbances stirred curiosity rather than panic. People woke briefly, checked their children, looked out at the dimly lit streets, and then returned to bed, unsure of what they had heard. Emergency response was swift where needed, quietly redirecting water, checking vulnerable structures, and ensuring that no immediate threat reached homes. There was calm competence in every action, a professionalism that went largely unnoticed by those who slept through it. Remarkably, thousands of Sheffield's residents were closer to peril than they realized. Yet, when morning came, the city appeared just as it always had, and the night's near-miss was largely forgotten. It didn't become a headline that defined an era. No stories passed down in newspapers or memoirs, because the British instinct was to understate, to carry on as though nothing had happened. You didn't talk about these things much. They belonged to the invisible machinery of life that somehow always seemed to work. And yet, even without widespread recognition, the night left a quiet legacy, a lingering sense of respect for the systems people trusted without question, an unspoken awareness of fragility, and a subtle reminder that the ordinary could contain extraordinary risk. For those who glimpsed it, however fleetingly, there was a mixture of awe and relief, a feeling that life had once again slipped through its protective hands without anyone fully noticing. It was in this gentle aftermath that the emotional weight of the night began to settle, not in headlines, but in memory. A reminder that even in calm streets and familiar routines, the city and its people had shared a secret brush with something far larger than themselves. And what lingered from that night would quietly shape how they remembered home, safety, and the fragile beauty of everyday life. What makes that night in Sheffield linger in memory isn't fear, but fragility. It reminds us how the ordinary routines we take for granted, the closing of a door, the ticking of a clock, the hum of a streetlight, can hinge on unseen details. A reservoir held a little longer, an embankment pressed just slightly, and the city carried on without anyone realizing how close it came to a very different morning. People miss that era not for its perfection, but for its intimacy. Communities were closer, connected through simple awareness of one another. Neighbors checked in, children played in streets where adults could see and know them, and there was a shared understanding that life, while never easy, was navigated together. Nights moved at a slower pace, giving time to listen to the rain on rooftops, to smell coal smoke drifting in from factories, to feel the quiet rhythm of a city settling down. That shared vulnerability, knowing that life could shift without warning, yet trusting in one another and in the systems around you, is something that is difficult to feel today. Life felt slower, but somehow fuller. Trust, for better or worse, was woven into every action, every routine. People rested knowing that someone, somewhere, was watching over the things that mattered, even if that someone was simply the unseen infrastructure holding the city together. Take a moment to imagine yourself there. The soft click of shutters, the whisper of wind through the streets, the warmth of a home tucked under its roof. Remember your own nights like that, when life seemed quietly safe and yet endlessly alive with small, unnoticed miracles. That memory, like Sheffield's night in 1962, lingers not in headlines or records, but in the subtle, shared feeling of being part of something larger, fragile and quietly enduring. Looking back, the contrast between then and now is striking. Today, technology buzzes with alerts, weather warnings flash across screens, and we live in constant awareness of what might go wrong. Safety has improved in countless ways, but with it, a certain innocence has been lost. Nights are no longer simple, and the quiet trust we once carried in our streets, our homes, and even in the unseen systems beneath us has faded. What was gained is clear: protection, foresight, and infrastructure designed to prevent the near misses that once went unnoticed. Yet what was lost carries its own weight: the shared silence of a city settling down, the gentle rhythm of everyday life, and the subtle reassurance that all was right in the world. These are things that cannot be measured, only remembered. Do you remember nights like this? Share this with someone who lived through the 60s and let them revisit that familiar rhythm with you. Thank you for joining us tonight on Past Britannia, for sitting quietly with a city in a time that taught us, gently, how precious the ordinary can be. Even as life moves faster now, there is comfort in remembering how it once felt: simple, full, and quietly alive.